I don't want to be pedantic, but I want to look at the MAGA movement, M-A-G-A. Now, some people think MAGA stands for Make America Great Again. Now, I may not have taken much notice in geography lessons decades ago, but there's North America, there's Central America, and there's South America. What they should be talking about is make the United States of America great again, not make America great again, because obviously the United States has no intention of making Canada, Central or South America great again. But that's just an aside, humorous, possibly aside. Now, I think MAGA stands for Make Australia Great Again. It's not like make the United States of America great again, make Australia great again. So, what I'd like to do is look at three sovereign nation states and see how they are attempting to not make themselves great again, because they never were, but attempting to look after the people living within those sovereign nation states. And obviously we've got the United States of America, which has a MAGA movement, which is about making America great again. And then you've got Australia, which is making Australia great again, a MAGA movement, which obviously is incandescent, doesn't exist. And then you've got Norway, a sovereign nation state, which through an intelligent and courageous position has made the 6 million people living in Norway the richest, not only the richest, but some of the most happiest people on the planet Earth. So what's the difference? Now, the MAGA movement in the United States of America wishes to make America great again by denying the contribution that tens of millions of settlers have made. To them, making America great again is about going back to the pre-Civil War days, where people knew their place, and somehow the Civil War was some type of an aberration, where 1 million Americans died in a war whose result was never actually accepted by a significant proportion of Americans. And what we are seeing is a movement that is attempting to hold back the tides of change, that somehow doesn't seem to understand the situation they find themselves in is totally, and the key word is totally, dependent on allowing an oligarchy, a handful of corporations, to dominate their economy. Because the policies which we have been enacted since the buffoon was elected in November last year are policies which have enriched a minuscule minority, using race and religion as calling cards. They've been able to convince a significant proportion of Middle America the way forward is to destroy what little bit of social equity existed in their community. At the same time, enhancing the power and privilege of a minuscule minority whose chief representative is in the White House, who has no hesitation in using the state to enrich himself. Now let's look at Norway. Norway had a particularly difficult time during the 20th century. In the early 20th century, migration was exceptionally important. Not migration into Norway, but people migrating out of Norway in order to feed their families, in order to have a future. And it's no accident many Norwegian people made their way to Australia as well as Canada and the United States of America. During World War II, Norway had a particularly difficult situation where the local fascists under Quisling were basically totally exploited by the Nazis. It's no accident that the word Quisling, which was the name of the leader of the Norwegian fascists who was executed, hung after World War II, continues to be used in the English-speaking world as a byword for somebody who's a traitor. But the Norwegians did something different after World War II. They elected governments who understood that the way forward was determined by how they looked after and managed their natural resources. And we saw policy after policy being put in place which were able to assist Norwegian people. And the funding came from their natural resources. In a land that has got a poor agricultural outlook because of its mountainous terrain and harsh winters, Norwegian people and their parliaments realised that for Norwegian people to have a good life, a safe life, required them using their natural resources to fund their future. Not only did they retain control of their natural resources, especially oil and gas, they also set up a future fund whose interest is now being used to look after the needs of the Norwegian people. Now let's move to Australia, the real MAGA, Make Australia Great Again. Now Australia took a totally different direction. Although it relied on immigration in order to expand as a nation, and although after World War II it relied on the slogan "Populate or Perish" because of the difficult situation the country found itself during World War II, during the invasion by the Japanese imperial forces, what we've seen is governments, whether they call themselves Liberal, National, Labor, what we've seen is governments that have had no interest in looking after the needs of future generations. As I keep saying ad nauseum on these YouTube presentations, we are 26 million people living on a resource-rich continent. So what have we done with these resources These are the resources which should have allowed us to form a treaty with this country's First Nations people. These are the resources which should have meant that we didn't have a housing crisis. These are the resources which should mean that we don't need private charities raising money to send Australian kids to public schools. These are the resources that should be used to fund and extend an overextended public hospital sector, an under-invested public infrastructure sector, an underfunded and under-resourced public education sector, and the list goes on and on. The reality is that we have allowed our resources to be hijacked, given away, not even hijacked, not even stolen, but given away to successive parliaments, to a small number of transnational and national-based corporations. We had the ridiculous situation in 2024, the federal government made more money from the HECS debt, which is imposed on university students, that it made from its petroleum rent tax. We have the ridiculous situation where Adani, an extraordinarily huge coal mining company, continues not to pay any tax, as well as much of the gas export industry. And when you look at our so-called future fund, there's less than 250 billion in that future fund, and a significant amount of that future fund has not come from the sale, from royalties and taxes of publicly funded assets. So how do we make Australia great again? Do we follow the divisive, corrupt gangsterism which we are now seeing being played out in the United States of America, where all the checks and balances which have been put in place have fallen apart, where Middle America believes that the only way forward is to deport and exploit the very people that have assisted in creating that society? Do we follow their racist, homophobic policies? And obviously there are elements in Australian society, as we've seen in the last few years, who would love to make Australia great again by going backwards and denying people who are citizens and permanent residents in this country the basic rights of any citizen or permanent resident? Or do we follow the Norwegian example, where we take a leaf out of their book and ensure that the resources which are found on this continent and the islands around this continent are exploited, used to enrich us as a people, not enrich a shrinking oligarchy, not enrich a shrinking investment class, not enrich that small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, but a society which is interested in not only creating wealth and redistributing wealth. For example, in Norway they have free tertiary education. In Norway you get 45 weeks parental leave on full pay, not 26 on a minimum wage as in this country, or have to pay for a university education. This is possible because they have over $3 trillion in their future fund. And the investments made by that future fund allows successive Norwegian parliaments to redistribute wealth to all its citizens. In this country, we have 32,000 registered charities which attempt to fill the deficiencies which cannot be filled by governments at the local, state and federal level, because power no longer lies in Parliament. So we are at a juncture. Do we move backwards? Do we move in the direction of the United States of America? Or do we move in a different direction? It's not a matter of not having the necessary resources. It's not a matter of not having the skilled population. It's not a matter of migration. But it is a matter of ensuring that we are able to finance what is needed in this country. And you cannot finance what is needed in this country if we continue, that's right, if we continue on this pathway of allowing a minuscule minority to dominate the parliamentary agenda. We have a government which has a historic majority. It is about to waste this historic majority because it is unwilling to enter a reform agenda which not only creates wealth but redistributes wealth to each and every one of us. We should have a future fund with $10 trillion in it, considering the extent of the resources we have in this country. And the only way to do this is to dramatically increase taxation for resource extraction companies and to dramatically increase royalties. And if they don't like it, they can move on. And we can nationalise what's left behind because they believe they can't make enough profits for their major shareholders. So the ball is in your court. Let's make Australia great again by utilising the resources we have to look after the interests of each and every one of us, including First Nations Australians. Let's make Australia great again by removing the need for a multitude of charities. Let's make Australia great again by ensuring that Parliament is in a position to legislate to assist us, the people of this country, not the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, and a minuscule investment class.